The Apostle of Peace, a Baha'i Blog article written and read by Michael Day. As we commemorate the centenary of the ascension of Abdu'l-Baha, it is timely to recount the story of how he predicted with sublime accuracy the outbreak of World War I, and also explained and developed a peace plan highly relevant to humanity today. Abdu'l-Baha, who was born in 1844 and passed away in 1921, spoke often about the plan which came from his father, Baha'u'llah, the prophetic figure who founded the Baha'i faith and who laid out the path to peace in his letters to the kings and rulers of the world. For example, during his journey throughout North America in 1912, Abdu'l-Baha emphasized the need for international peace, calling it the most momentous question of the day. Newspapers gave him such labels as the Persian peace apostle and the prophet of peace, and the journalists reported how he linked the concept of peace to the need for a world tribunal and collective security. Surprisingly for audiences at the time, he also connected peace to topics like the education and advancement of women. War will cease, he said, when women have full equality, because they will be the obstacle and hindrance to it. Although there was a growing international peace movement, the European nations were steadily stockpiling armaments in preparation for war. Possessed of a keen insight into humanity, Abdu'l-Baha knew that the fledgling peace movement was impotent. He openly predicted the horror ahead. To the Montreal Star newspaper, he said, "These warlike preparations will necessarily culminate in a great war. The very armaments themselves are productive of war. This great arsenal must go ablaze." And on September the 11th, a date that was to become significant for a warlike event 89 years later, the local newspaper in the city of Buffalo in the United States reported him warning against a great European war and pleading that the people of this country do what they can to avert terrible bloodshed. The newspaper reported him as saying, "The continent of Europe is one vast arsenal, which only requires one spark at its foundations, and the whole of Europe will become a wasted wilderness. And what flimsy, what impudent pretexts they use. Patriotism, say they. Glory, say they. The upholding of the continent, say they. What a travesty on God's truth." But anybody thinking that this peace advocate might be an impractical idealist like so many others soon found they were severely mistaken, because Abdu'l-Baha was the epitome of one who trod the spiritual path with practical feet. He did not advocate unilateral disarmament by a single power, an act he warned would lead to aggression, but referred instead to Baha'u'llah's plan. He said, "The peace of the world must be brought about by international agreement. All nations must agree to disarm simultaneously." In California, in October 1912, he repeated the warnings of the war ahead and specified when it would begin, saying, "The time is 2 years hence, when only a spark will set aflame the whole of Europe." Nearly 2 years later, on the 3rd of August 1914, Abdu'l-Baha, back home in Haifa, announced what was about to happen, just as he had predicted 2 years previously in Canada and the United States. He said, "A general melee of the civilized nations is in sight. A tremendous conflict is at hand. The world is at the threshold of a most tragic struggle. Vast armies, millions of men, are being mobilized and stationed at their frontiers. They are being prepared for the fearful contest. The slightest friction will bring them into a terrific crash, and there will be a conflagration, the likes of which is not recorded in the past history of mankind." The very next day, the greatest power on earth at the time, Great Britain, declared war on Germany. 3 months later, Great Britain, France, and Russia declared war on Turkey. And in response, the Caliph, Sultan Muhammad V, the titular head of the Ottoman Empire, declared holy war against them. With great foresight, Abdu'l-Baha made sure Baha'i farmers in the Galilee stored grain to guard against any future famine. Eventually, the food kept in reserve saved many in the region from starving to death. The British, who ejected the Turkish forces from the Holy Land in 1917, recognised the humanitarian activities of Abdu'l-Baha by knighting him in 1920. Abdu'l-Baha continued to communicate the teachings of Baha'u'llah. In 1920, there came from him a tablet of outstanding profundity. He pointed out the horrors of the conflict that had concluded 2 years before, saying how flourishing countries have been reduced to rubble, cities have been levelled with the ground, and many a once prosperous village has been turned into ruin. He noted that 60 years previously, Baha'u'llah had warned the German emperor and the Turkish sovereign of the terrible fate that now, as a result of the Great War, had befallen their realms. Then Abdu'l-Baha issued a warning of a conflict that was yet to come, saying, "The vanquished powers will continue to agitate. They will resort to every measure that may rekindle the flame of war." But he did not leave mankind without hope. To the contrary, he once again outlined Baha'u'llah's prescription for universal peace. He said, "To bring this about, a supreme tribunal must be established, representative of all governments and peoples. Questions, both national and international, must be referred thereto, and all must carry out the decrees of this tribunal. Should any government or people disobey, let the whole world arise against that government or people." But as it turned out, and as he had predicted, the arrangement at the end of the First World War carried the seeds of another conflict, and war reignited in 1939. In 1985, drawing on the teachings of Baha'u'llah and the explanations of Abdu'l-Baha, the Universal House of Justice issued a statement called The Promise of World Peace, which contains a step-by-step guide to preventing war. It remains available for today's leaders to seize and implement.